welcome to the Debrief. I'm Donna King, Carolina Journal's editor-in-chief. We have our team here today. We're going to be talking about Carolina Journal's new poll, breaking news today, the latest details on what we have going into the November election, just a few short weeks away. Of course, in the John Locke Foundation, Mitch Kokai joining us with expert analysis. Dr. Andy Jackson from the John Locke Foundation as well, coming in to tell us the latest, what we can expect on the election, and Carolina Journal's Deputy Editor-in-Chief. Okay, let's get right to it. One of the things that we've got going on right now, Mitch and I, we've all been talking about it this morning. There's some breaking news evolving today. It's a developing story happening with Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Make sure you check carolinajournal.com for the latest on that developing story. Okay, let's jump right into Carolina Journal's poll. Right now, we're going to start real quick with the direction of the country. This has not been trending well over the last year, has it, Mitch?
It has not, although there's been a little bit improvement this time around when you ask if the U.S. is moving in the right direction or on the wrong track. Right now, it's still fairly low, 27% saying right direction, 63% wrong track, but that's actually up. Back in August, it was 23% right direction and 68% wrong track. So a little bit of movement in the right direction, but not a lot. We're still only a little bit more than a quarter of the people surveyed thinking that things are in the right direction.
Sure, sure. Now, when this is the trend that we were just talking about, it's trending up a little bit in right direction. What do you attribute that to?
Folks are probably feeling a little bit better about their personal circumstances than they were a few months ago, perhaps. Income pickup increases has started to catch up a little bit with inflation. It still hasn't. It's still behind where it was a couple of years ago, but it is slowly getting there as the rate of inflation has come down. Now, inflation is still above that 2% mark that the Fed has said, well, that's our target. So it's still too high, but wages are catching up a little bit. So that probably helps some.
Sure, and we still have 63% or so saying wrong track. Now, if we look again now, if we move on to the direction of North Carolina, so we have the trend line is next, but then we have the direction of North Carolina is the next slide there. We still have 52% saying we're headed in the wrong direction. What do you say?
These questions are very interesting because you don't necessarily get to the source of why they think it's the right or the wrong direction.
Sure,
so they could be attributing the rightness or the wrongness of the direction to different camps. And so in a state like North Carolina, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Republican legislature. So in the cohort that's saying we're headed in the wrong direction, who are those people and why? Are they frustrated with Governor Cooper? He keeps giving vetoes. Are they frustrated with the legislature who keep overriding Governor Cooper's vetoes? And so it's hard to really gauge what the source of that bad direction is. But I think what is consistent is that there are pain points across the political spectrum. We've got the economy. Obviously, our voters in the Carolina Journal polls previously have pointed to inflation in the economy and prices as one of those the worst pain points. And so it makes sense that 52% of people, the bottom half of North Carolina maybe, that is feeling the most pain from these things, thinking that we're heading in the wrong direction.
Of course. Well, let's jump ahead. Go ahead.
And very interesting, the North Carolina number hasn't really changed much from August to September. About 33 good direction, 53% wrong direction. But there was difference in the U.S. number, and I'm wondering if one of the factors might have been Democrats who are now happy that they are not saddled by Joe Biden, and now happier that they have Kamala Harris and that they've been getting all this positive buzz, and then it looks a little bit better for them, which we'll be talking about a little bit later.
Yeah, of course, that is good context. We could jump ahead to top issues. Inflation and prices remain the tippy top, the pointy end of the election concerns in North Carolina.
Yeah, and if you look at number 3, number 2 is immigration at just under 16%. Number 3 is jobs and economy, also at just under 16%. Put inflation, prices, jobs, economy, all those economic things together, and that's almost 46%. So as you would expect in most elections, the economy's stupid, as James Carville liked to say years ago. Then, as we said, immigration, number 2. If you go beyond those top 3, then abortion is the top issue for 16% of voters. So the fact that this has become such a big issue, especially in Democratic ads, that's probably a reason why that's top of mind. Then you go to education, about 6.5%. Taxes and spending, a little over 6%. Crime and public safety, surprisingly, a little under 3%. That's beginning a lot of buzz, but in terms of a top issue, hasn't gotten a lot of traction in this poll. And then energy and the environment, about 2.5%.
Sure, sure. Jeff, tell me what you think about this, because when you say crime and public safety, I think that has become interchanged with concerns about immigration.
I was just going to make that point. I think a lot of the conversation around immigration, it actually pulls in the crime and public safety component to it. So people may attach it to that issue so strongly that they are more quickly going to check that box for immigration as a top issue rather than crime and public safety. Also, there's probably some effect to the closeness of whatever the public safety concerns are to certain people. They see things in the evening news, they see things in our metro, the high population areas, they see the trends, and they see the immigration numbers and criminals coming across the border and illegal alien criminals being arrested and released in our counties, but maybe in their particular neighborhood things have not been bad. Their cars are not getting broken into or such like. So they may have anecdotal confidence in their own little public safety, but they do see that immigration as an issue, and they may associate it with the spikes in crime in other areas, maybe just not in their backyard. And North Carolina is a place that we have several of those metro nodes, but we have a lot of suburbia and rural parts of North Carolina where the concentration of people and the rates of crime are not going to be front and center like they might be in some city centers.
Sure, sure. What do you think about abortion now looking to be even with, say, immigration and jobs in the economy? That surprised me because I guess the ads are working.
Well, it's an important issue for a segment of the population. The question is which segment.
Right.
This would be disproportionate, I suspect, younger females that would be a big issue for them. That's a demographic that already pretty heavily votes Democratic. So while it may be up there, it may have a little bit less of an impact on the election than you might suspect from it being one of the top 4 issues. Fairly similar with immigration. There are a lot of voters who care deeply about immigration and the potential problems that comes with unregulated immigration across our borders. And disproportionately, those are Republican-based voters with the current kind of turn and realignment of things under Donald Trump. And so how many of those abortion voters or immigration voters are in the swing camp, in between that relatively small segment of voters? That's kind of an open question. Now, clearly, the internal polling that Democrats have run lead them to believe that they're kind of like maybe some of these suburban women who might otherwise vote on security issues, maybe will decide to vote on the abortion issue, and that's really why they're pushing that, and while Republicans are pushing that traditional law and order issue to try to woo that segment.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I do think that these ads really are hitting that suburban woman demographic, and that might be why we're seeing a jump in that.
Yeah, and it's not surprising because that is a segment of the electorate that everyone wants to reach and swing to their side because they can go either way.
Very interesting. Let's jump ahead here to the generic state legislative ballot. This thing surprised me, truthfully. What this means that if you can see the question down there at the bottom of this slide, if the 2024 election were held today and you had to make a choice, would you vote for the Republican or the Democratic candidate for the North Carolina state legislature? Now, state legislatures enjoyed a majority for, more than a decade now, but it looks like this is now within a percentage point.
Very interesting. We have Republicans with just a slight lead over Democrats, 46% to 45.6%, which is well within the margin of error, and that has been a trend downward for Republicans, upward for Democrats. Back in April, the gap was almost 6 points, an advantage which was probably overstated. That seems in a state like North Carolina to be a bit of an overstatement, but it was also 4 points in May and 1.5 points the last time that we did this. So it's gone down, which is interesting. And when we get to the next slide, which is the generic congressional ballot, you'll see it's not just a shift toward Democrats in everything, because that next slide will also be interesting and will be kind of counterintuitive for what we see in the rest of the poll.
Sure, sure. Are there any state legislative seats that you're thinking may be experiencing some change between our last poll and this one?
Well, there's going to be. Now, there's when you have the statewide shifts like that,
Sure.
it's going to play differently in different areas.
Right.
Part of the problem for Democrats is not just how many people support Democrats, it's where they are. Democrats do tend to be clustered, relative to Republicans in smaller areas. So you're going to have places in central Raleigh, central Charlotte, where Democrats are going to be getting 70, 80% of the vote.
Right.
And Republicans tend to do better in those, most of the rural areas, except for the Northeast, the so-called Black Belt, where Democrats are still competitive. But most of those suburban, those ring areas, like your Union counties, near Charlotte, your Johnston County, near Raleigh, kind of the outer triad areas, those areas are kind of the breadbasket for Republicans. And they're probably still going to be able to hold those just because they have enough voters in that area, even if things are going the Democrats' way. And we can't discount that Republicans drew the maps. And so there's a built-in advantage there. So those two things built together probably give Republicans a solid chance of retaining the majorities, even if they fall short of supermajorities.
Very interesting. Let's actually go on to their generic congressional ballot. What are your thoughts on it? Who wants to grab it?
I'll start out just because I kind of teased it the last time around. Much of this poll is showing movement toward Democrats.
Okay.
Sometimes by 4 or 5 points. This is a case where the movement went toward Republicans. The last time around, when we asked about the generic congressional ballot, it was a much smaller margin for the Republicans. They had a 1.6 point lead, which is nice, but it's not huge. This time around, now more than 3 points.
Right.
Almost 48% of people saying Republicans, a little bit less than 45% saying Democrats. So that was an interesting shift, that while the rest of the poll seems to be going in Democrats' direction, for the generic congressional ballot, Republicans actually make a gain. I'm not sure what to make of that, but it's an interesting counterintuitive thing.
Yeah, one interpretation.
Yeah. No, please, go right ahead.
One interpretation, and this kind of fits in with politics in the South writ large, but in North Carolina also, is that you're really dealing with a different beast with federal elections.
Okay.
Because with state elections, you have the local issues, you may vote whoever you like. But another consideration at the federal level is you're sending somebody to Washington, to Congress, to do battle with representatives and senators sent down from Massachusetts or Illinois or New York. And so it's easier for Republicans to kind of run against that kind of East Coast cocktail set. And I think that gives an added advantage to Republicans in federal elections compared to state. So if you look at elections over the 21st century, Republicans do very well in federal elections, including Senate elections. For Democrats, they're more likely to win statewide for state offices compared to U.S. Senate, for example. And so I think that's an advantage Republicans are probably going to retain, especially if they believe that Kamala Harris has a better chance of winning the White House. There's a very small set of voters who are pretty sophisticated in their thinking. Maybe they overthink things, they vote strategically, and this small difference may be a result of that amongst that small segment.
Right, absolutely. Well, we're both North Carolinians for a long ways back. We have a Cooper-Trump state. This doesn't seem that unusual to what Andy's saying, that sometimes we go more conservative federally and Democrat locally.
Definitely a different dynamic in the issue sets you're dealing with, and you actually find some trouble with this as a local candidate because a lot of your voters want to ask you about things that your local office you're running for actually doesn't deal with, because everyone gets pulled up to the federal issues, and so it's much easier to have an us versus them dynamic in that. Republicans are able to push on that, and so I can see that in the congressional, the generic ballot there. I also wonder if there's an aggregate and kind of regional effect going on with just the whole collection of ads that are going on right now. So you're inundated everywhere you turn if you're in an area that's competitive, especially.
Mailers,
and so you're getting mailers, you're seeing congressional ads, you're seeing attack ads against the different ones. I suspect that the congressional attack ads against Democratic nominees may have more sting to them because of those federal issues, and there's more. The voters are pulling down more on that because they sympathize with it. They think about these national issues. They're on Fox News and MSNBC and chewing on these things a lot. So when they see the congressional stuff, maybe they're more enthused and given that advantage to the Republicans. And then you go statewide. We have some of these unusual dynamics as a southern state. People are more familiar with that, and they know that the state issues are a little bit different. So they're evening it out.
So this could be an anti-Trump Biden trend. And, when we're looking at this federal level. So if we look at the presidential, let's look at the presidential ballot. So still President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, Republican, with a slight lead, but certainly well within the margin of error. Really what we're looking at is a dead heat, I think, here.
Yeah, you basically have to, because of the fact that this poll is a margin of error of almost 4 percentage points. The fact that he's ahead by 0.3 percentage points is not really much to speak of. And that's down. He was up 3 points in August, and now it's almost gone. He was up 4.5 points in May, a little bit more than 4 points in April. So it's definitely a swing in the direction of Democrats. We should mention this is a poll of 600 likely general election voters, and it was taken starting on Sunday, right after the second assassination attempt. So there was no bump for Trump from the fact that he was targeted for a second assassination attempt, at least right away. I mean, maybe that has an impact going down the line, but it didn't right away. And I think another interesting thing to mention is this is the first time our poll has had Cornel West on it, and Cornel West got 1.6% of the vote. You have to think that if the people who are voting for West were going to vote at all otherwise, and they aren't just coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, to vote, that they're likely Harris voters. And so if you throw at least, even a percentage point of that 1.6% of West toward Harris, she would be in the lead.
Very interesting. What are your thoughts on this? Still 6% undecided. Is that a standard amount, or does that?
Well, that makes sense. Trump's obviously well known. Harris is well known enough, and she's been, even if she's avoiding the press, she's been in the news enough. People are familiar enough with these candidates, and really because Trump is there, really people really know which side they want to be on. And this is still, as much as the Trump campaign wants to make this referendum on Harris, any election with Donald Trump is going to be an election about Donald Trump. And so that's going to tend to drive down your undecideds because people have very definite opinions about Donald Trump. So yeah, having that small undecided is normal. My only question here is when you've seen all these pop stars and athletes coming out for Kamala, there's a trendy thing now. The big question with these polls since Harris has come out, particularly with all these endorsements in the convention, is are we seeing a genuine movement towards Harris, or is this a reemergence of the so-called shy Trump voter that we've seen in other polls where there was fairly consistent underreporting by 2-3 percentage points of support for Trump? In theory, the pollsters who've been burned a couple times on this have updated their methodology to account for that. And so maybe this is not a problem now, but this is something we're really not going to know until election night.
Yeah, absolutely. What does this tell the parties? What do they need to take this information into the home stretch here?
Yeah, well, for federally, if I'm not mistaken, the level of support for Trump going back even when he was enjoying a lead here earlier in the summer were around the same that they are now. And it's been the Biden to the Harris switch and then Harris floating up to meet him, correct? And so this seems kind of like the completion of the sigh of relief that they have a candidate that they can get behind. And you've got, because Trump's not going to gain more voters. The opinions on Trump are set. There are some people in the middle that are going to weigh him versus another candidate. And back in June, weighing him against Biden was a very different equation than weighing him against than Harris today. So as they look at this, I would think that they really now, if they were wondering before, is North Carolina still a swing state? I think absolutely that this is very much in play, as are a lot of these other swing states. Everything's tightening up, and so if there was any tendency for people to take their foot off the gas on one side or the other because of the polling we had earlier this summer, those tendencies are gone, and everybody is pedal to the metal to make sure that they leave it all out there in the field and make sure they get as many votes as possible.
Sure. As we go through these horse races, where do you want to start?
Well, let's go ahead and do the governor's race, and then probably we'll tick through the Council of State, kind of put them all together and talk about them all as one package.
All right, so when we look at this, Republican Mark Robinson at 39.2, again, this was in the field this past Sunday and Monday, going into just after the second attempt on President Trump. So Republican Mark Robinson at 39.2, Democrat Josh Stein at 45.5.
Yeah, a big shift towards Stein, which other polls have suggested. There have been some polls that say he has a double-digit lead. I think one poll said he had a 14-point lead, which seems sort of out there, a little bit of a stretch. But 6.3%, a lead, 6.3 percentage points for Josh Stein. That's a big lead, and it does show movement. And if we look back at our own polls, Mark Robinson we had up by 2 points in April. Then it was basically a dead heat in May. Stein was up 4.5 points in August. It just keeps moving more in his direction. And if you look at where Robinson has been, he basically has not been able to get to 40%. He peaked at one point at 39.9%. I think his low was 38%. Of course, we're talking about this all before we know any of this breaking news that's been coming out today about Mark Robinson. But in our polling, 38, 39%, never getting to 40, whereas Josh Stein has gained 7.5 points since April. He's been going up, Robinson staying put.
Sure. Does this speak to the power of ads? I mean,
yeah,
he's running an anti-Robinson campaign?
And just name ID. A lot of the people, when Robinson was enjoying a lead, there was a healthy bit of undecided people. And so the more those people have been clued into the election, seeing some of these attack ads against Robinson, seeing the ads in support of Stein, and seeing the ticket change federally as well, may bring them out a little bit more to take a stand. And so you see that floating up and over, and that's a lot of momentum. I think that's exactly, if you're the Stein campaign, this is exactly what you want to see. It's kind of like a steady progression of their momentum. And now that they're getting into the final home stretch, it seems like that they're in a position to be able to put it away.
Sure. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the Robinson campaign's been kind of suffering the death of 1,000 cuts over the summer. There's some statement he made, gets out in the news, they run ads on it. There's problems with his wife's business, that gets out in ads, and there's a lot of news on it. There's problems with an NGO that he and his wife had worked on. So all of these things, just one thing after another, and at some point, voters can be forgiving, but at some point when you see thing after thing after thing coming down on somebody that shows, maybe there's a character issue there or a judgment issue there, eventually voters are going to be weary of that. And I think that is something that you've seen, and Robinson hasn't had a real answer to those.
Sure.
I don't know.
He's a tremendous support, though, right? I mean, he does have supporters who, say he is the guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was far and away the preference of North Carolina Republicans in the primary. State Treasurer Dale Folwell, well-liked candidate, was out there campaigning very early on. Businessman Bill Graham put millions of his own dollars into a campaign. Neither one of them could dent the support for Mark Robinson. To me, I don't know that we will ever know this story, but the story I would love to know is when Josh Stein and his campaign advisors sat down, how did they plot out, we're going to release this at this time, and then we're going to release this at this time, and then we're going to release this at this time.
They clearly have had it for a long time.
Right, and this is how we're going to take down Mark Robinson and ensure that we win. Now, of course, voters could still change their minds, but all of the trends are moving toward Josh Stein having a fairly clear electoral victory. Now, as we move to the rest of the Council of State, just to save some time,
which one
might just be interesting just to go through them and then talk about them all together, because I think they'll be interesting on trends. So, Lieutenant Governor, this race has now moved into the lead for the Democrat, Rachel Hunt, at 41.6% to 40.1% for Hal Weatherman. That's a 1.5 point lead. Weatherman was in the lead when we talked about this in August. If you move to Attorney General, which has been a high profile race, you've got Jeff Jackson in the lead now, 44.6% to 43.1% for Dan Bishop. Once again, a 1.5 lead. The last time that we polled this, it was almost a 4-point lead for Bishop, so major swing. Look at Labor Commissioner up next. You've got the Democrat once again in the lead, the Charlotte Councilman Braxton Winston, 41.3% to 40.9% for Luke Farley. That one less than half a percentage point, but the last time around, Farley was about 3.5 points ahead. Treasurer, this is a bright spot, one of the few bright spots in this for Republicans. Brad Briner still in the lead, 42.1% to 40.4% for Wesley Harris, 1.7 point gap. But last time around, Briner was up by 5 points, so his lead has dropped by 3 points. Superintendent of Public Instruction, this is one that's worth mentioning. Mo Green, the Democrat, at 43.3% to 39.2% for Michelle Morrow. So a 4-point lead for Mo Green. Last time around, there was a 4.5-point lead for Michelle Morrow. What's interesting to note here is if you look at all of these council of state races, Republicans have been gaining from August to September. Their percentages have been going up. But all of the Democrats have been gaining even more. If Republicans have gone up a point and a half, Democrats have gone up 5 points, 6 points.
Right.
The one thing that's been different, the only candidate who went down from August to September was Morrow. Morrow was at 41.5% last time. Now she's down to 39.2%. So you would think that some of the campaigning against Michelle Morrow has taken effect. Just going through the rest of them as quickly as we can. Auditor, once again, the Republican still has the lead. Dave Bullock. This is kind of interesting because the Democrat is an appointed incumbent, Jessica Holmes. Bullock up 38.9% to 38.3%, so about a half-point difference. He was up a little bit more the last time around, but that race hasn't changed a whole lot. The last three that we have, we didn't poll last time around, but these are the ones where there's an incumbent who won the election last time around running for re-election. And so Insurance Commissioner Mike Causey, 41% to 39.7% for Natasha Marcus, the state senator, about a point and a half. The Agriculture Commissioner race, Steve Troxler, who's always one of the top polling candidates for Republicans, he has a 3.2-point lead, 41.4% to Sarah Tabor's 37.9%. And Sean Haw, the Libertarian, you might remember years ago, he was the beer guy, sat down, drank a beer when he ran for office. He's getting a couple of points. And then Secretary of State Elaine Marshall, who, if Richard Petty can't beat Elaine Marshall, I don't know who is going to beat her. She has a 1.7-point lead. 43.2 points to 41.5 points for Chad Brown, the Republican. So if you go through all of those council of state races, Republicans who were leading in almost everything last time around except the governor's race, now they're only leading treasurer, auditor, insurance commissioner, ag commissioner.
Wow.
Democrats in the lead everywhere else. The one other horse race, well, I guess we could do the amendment too, but the other horse races are Supreme Court. Last time around, Jefferson Griffin, the appeals court judge, running against Allison Riggs. He had a 2.5-point lead. Now Riggs is ahead by 2.5 points, 43.7% to 41.2% for Griffin. And then on the constitutional amendment that we will see on the ballot, last time around, 80% of people said that they would support that amendment with only 10% against. It's gone down a little bit, but still overwhelmingly in favor of citizens only voting, 76% in favor, 13% against. I think grouping all those together, it's probably just good to get everyone's thoughts about which of those races they found interesting or the trends.
Sure. Well, one, the constitutional amendment, that actually will be on your ballot when you come in. Perhaps you've followed some of our polls before. We had other amendments. This one will actually be on the ballot when you go in November. The one I do think is interesting actually is the Supreme Court, because while it's not going to flip the partisan makeup of the Supreme Court, it really sets up, if Allison Riggs, a Democrat, is to win and then they pick up Anita Earl's seat next, it really does create a situation that by the end of the decade, Democrats could reclaim control of the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things they're trying to do. They have seen their lead on the court go from 6-1 to their advantage to now 5-2 to the Republicans' advantage. If Jefferson Griffin knocks Allison Riggs off, it would go 6-1 Republican, and that would be a really deep hole for the Democrats. So I think they are saying, let's stop it here, stop the bleeding, keep this seat, keep Anita Earl's seat the next time, and then try to move the momentum toward wins.
Right. Now, what in these races was interesting to you?
Well, the big picture thing is it's hard for candidates in these kind of middle positions on the ballot, these council of state, once you get down south of Attorney General, to catch much public interest. And so they do tend to rise and fall with the tides, as it were. And also these council of state races, with a few exceptions, tend to be really, really close. There's this narrow, say, 47-53 band that almost every race, with the possible exception of ag commissioner, because Troxler seems to pull it out in the end every time. Almost all those council state races are going to get there because people pay attention to the top of the ballot, and then people also pay attention to the local races because somebody's knocked on their door and asked for their vote personally. But those middle spots on the ballot, people just tend to kind of go with the flow about how they normally vote. So you have a kind of a higher bottom line for like Republicans sticking with Republicans, Democrats sticking with Democrats. It'd be fewer switchovers there. And but looking at individual races, probably I'm most interested in that Attorney General's race. Republicans do have a real chance with this one, with Bishop. He's a solid campaigner. He's not a spectacularly good-looking guy, but he knows his subject matter, and he's strong with the base voters. The question is, does he have crossover appeal? And I'm sure Republicans, as much as any race here, would love to win this race. A Republican has not won for Attorney General in North Carolina since 1896.
Wow.
And there's been a couple of appointed Attorney Generals since then. But yeah, they haven't. So it's been well over a century since Republicans have picked up Attorney General. It's a powerful position. It is, AG stands for aspiring governor. It's the springboard for governors. So Republicans would really like to pick this one up if they can.
And there again, Dan Bishop, I think he's got a lot of Republican support because they're looking for somebody that's strong on Twitter, standing up and being kind of a firebrand in that kind of way, perhaps not a TikTok way, right?
Jeff Jackson's the TikTok guy.
Yeah, he is the TikTok guy. Just tell me what struck you about some of these results?
Yeah, this generic ballot result for the state legislative races actually stuck out to me. Just 'cause one thing that gets lost in these conversations when we talk about general elections especially is the Republican versus Democrat. And in North Carolina, we acknowledge that we have these pockets of blue, and then we have these big red spaces in North Carolina. But Andy talks about this all the time, how big the unaffiliated vote is in North Carolina. It is the largest share of voters in North Carolina compared to the other parties. And those people are really hard to pin down as far as what way they're going to go. This legislative, the generic ballot for the state legislative races shows a shift to the Democrats in that way. I wonder if that shift is coming from a lot of unaffiliated voters that have soured on whatever they have soured on as far as the state legislature has gone. And there weren't a whole lot of big, high-profile, like really dogged fights between the Republican legislature and the Republican governor in the lead up to this. And I wonder if there's less enthusiasm for this side of things or that side of things in that makeup that has allowed it to move this much in conjunction with the move toward Harris when they had the new nominee and everything. So that may be pulling on things as well. But the shift is really, in general, is really what sticks out to me.
Absolutely.
And how much you can move from June to September.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, one of the other things we wanted to really look at is how do people view getting information, campaign ads, the value of really how we're being bombarded really through the computer in our pockets about what we're seeing. What did we find out?
Yeah, so we had a handful of issues questions beyond these horse races, and one of them was third parties. Did we talk about the third party?
Yeah, no, here we go. Third
so we had the
parties,
third parties, and the question was not, are you going to vote for a third party, but it was, what do you think the third party candidates do to the race? And basically your options were, this is a good thing because it gives people an alternative to the Republicans and the Democrats, or this person's just a spoiler who takes away votes from the major candidates.
Sure.
A little bit less than 50% thought this is good, give people more options, but about a third, 35% of people said no, they're mainly spoilers taking away votes from the major parties. And there was an interesting split, a partisan split, shocker, on what these third party candidates do. 60% of Democrats liked having the third party option, which having Cornel West on the ballot for them might be of interest. It might end up costing them if Donald Trump barely wins and Cornel West gets a percentage point or more of the vote. But among independents, about 50% thought it was better to have more options. But then among Republicans, the plurality answer at 45% was that they're spoilers. So Republicans seem like they would more likely like to have a one-on-one race between Republicans and Democrats.
Sure. We look at the candidate info source. Tell me what you all think about this. We're going to go to the next one. Debates. Still ranking top, but no one seems to want to debate.
Yeah, and when you think about the televised debates and whether or not they're still relevant,
sure.
We tend to, in the 2024, does this matter as much? As it certainly mattered in June when you see the contrast in performances there,
that's true.
and you see the results
sure.
There. But I think this is maybe the cleanest dirty shirt in your dirty laundry hamper, right? To where everyone's grabbing for something, and this is really the most trustworthy thing because you can see them up there. You understand they're giving talking points, they're prepared, but it's there. They're in front of moderators answering questions. And when you look at everything else on here, there's just the trust quotient is very, very, very low.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
And campaign ads are 0.1?
Yeah, I was going to say,
yeah.
going through the rest of the options, debates were at about 26%. The traditional news, about 17.5%. Rallies and speeches, 16%. So some people think those are a good way to get information. Then a little bit less than 10% online news, 6.5% direct mail or the candidates' websites, 3% social media, 2.5% endorsements from other candidates, and then it was 0.1% campaign ads. And if you looked at the actual numbers of the 600 people, one person said campaign ads were the best source.
Well, that brings me to the last one. So we have election ad truth. 65.9% said that they just don't think they're true. What do you think?
Yeah, well, in a sense, they're not true. I mean, they are a derived version of the truth. Campaigns don't want to directly lie about their opponents, but they will bend that truth as much as they can without getting into the realm of lies, and maybe sometimes they trip over that line.
Yeah.
The issue there is ads, especially negative ads, work. People might say they don't influence them, but they do. I mean, there's been studies. Information from negative ads especially are retained by voters. There's this old rule of thumb that you've got to hit somebody with information 6 times in order for it to really sink in. Those negative ads are information a lot of times that candidates don't want you to know about, but the other candidate is more than willing to give you that information about their opponent, and it tends to stick with people. So I really think that this result here is one of those results where maybe people are being aspirational in what they say compared to the reality of the matter.
Sure.
Even in this same poll result that people are saying that campaign ads do not affect them.
Right.
We just discussed the movement in the Robinson numbers over the course of the summer in which he's been inundated with a bunch of negative campaign attack ads against him from the Stein campaign, and it shows the needle moving as those ads are getting out, and we can't draw a straight line to it and say this is definitely what's happening. But it does seem to bring into question if campaign ads really matter more than people will let on.
Absolutely.
And I think people don't want to admit that they're gullible in any way, and they understand that campaign ads can really play with the truth and bend it as much as possible. And so you're never the one to say, well, yeah, I'm influenced by campaign ads, because you don't want to admit to that that sort of wavering sensibility. But yeah, it's something that that definitely sticks out, that the highest rated thing in here still didn't even get to a quarter of the people. So 75% of people don't even think the debates. And so that shows that we may not be as apathetic as we used to be, because politics has drawn us into so many more conversations, but the cynicism is still there, for sure.
Sure. Any parting thoughts as we head out?
Just the fact that it's going to be very interesting to see what happens between now and then. This poll definitely showed movement toward Democrats. We're going to have another poll in the middle of October, so we'll see if that trend continues or if they have sort of been peaking, because that's been one of the questions about Kamala Harris. She was the new nominee coming out of nowhere. She had a convention that basically said, hey, Kamala Harris is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Then she had a debate performance that was very strong against Donald Trump. Does that wave continue for her, or do people start saying, okay, now let me look at the record and the fact that she's called for some crazy things over the years, and do they move back toward Trump? And does that help people down the ballot? Plus, as we said at the beginning of the show, there's new news that could affect the North Carolina governor's race, and that could affect everything.
Absolutely. Make sure you stay with CarolinaJournal.com for all the latest news on this poll and everything else happening in North Carolina public policy and politics. Thanks so much for joining us.